Hello friends! In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to draw this whimsical landscape, and I'll share the process step by step so you can achieve this look no matter your skill level. Let's dive in. I will be drawing on the iPad using the Procreate app version 5.4, and I have my canvas set to 4000 by 3000 pixels at 300 dpi. If you don't have enough storage on your iPad for a file this large, you can use the pre-formatted screen size canvas, which will give you the same aspect ratio but at a smaller size and lower resolution. If you'd like to use the same colors I'll be using in this drawing, I'll share my palette, which you can import directly into Procreate, or if you're using a different drawing app, you can pull the hex codes from the color card I created for you. I've also created a template to make the drawing process a little easier if you're new to drawing or if you just want a shortcut. There's a link in the description for these free downloads. And if you're one of my email subscribers, be sure to check your inbox because I've already sent you the template and color palette. Before we start drawing, I'd love if you'd like, comment, subscribe, and watch till the very end because it really helps the channel. Okay, if you're planning to use a template, let's import that first. Go to the Actions menu, tap Add, tap Insert a Photo, and if you've already downloaded and saved the template, find it in your camera roll, then tap to import. The template is really straightforward. These curves are where we'll draw the hills. This dome outlines the area where we'll draw the little mushroom houses. And these lines are guides for where we can position the trees. All right, let's go to that template layer and reduce the opacity so it's really transparent. Then create a new layer above. And choose your favorite sketching brush. I'm going to use Huntsman, which is located in the Procreate library in the pencil set. And the first thing we'll do is sketch out our scene. So first, you're basically just going to trace the curves for all of the hills, and you can take advantage of Procreate's quick shape feature for this. If you draw a curve and keep your pencil down, it will snap to a clean arc. If you continue to keep your pencil down, you can also change the position and shape, or you can tap Edit Arc at the top of the screen and use the blue transform nodes to adjust the shape. Now, we're not going to draw an actual dome in this forest, but we want the trees to curve in toward each other to frame the houses that we're going to draw below. So on the right side, start with a fairly straight line for the tree trunk, and then try to transition that into a smooth curve. Then the tree on the left can curve up and over the first tree rather than meeting in the middle. So you see, this still gives the feeling of an arch, but without being a rigid dome shape. Now let's turn those lines into trees. We're going for a whimsical, magical scene, so the trees can be fun and exaggerated. So this first tree is going to be shaped like a giant leaf. And for this one, I'm going to make it a stem with 3 medium-sized leaves. Now let's use these lines to build the rest of our forest, but we're going to want several of the trees to overlap, so let's draw the next set on a new layer. Starting with this first line on the far left, we can add a branch and then use round pom-pom shapes at the top. Then maybe add a couple more lines for branches. Okay, on to tree number 4, and we can make this look like a giant leaf as well. Feel free to play around and experiment with different shapes. Remember, we're working on a different layer, so we can erase the overlapping sections without disrupting the trees in the foreground. All right, let's skip a line and move on to tree number 6. We want some variety with the shape, so I'm going to start with a sort of triangle and then add a couple rows of semicircles to make it look more round and full. I'm just going to use the eraser tool to clean that up a bit and get a better sense of what the shape looks like. Then I can finish off with a couple branches. All right, let's go back to tree number 5, but I don't want to sketch it on this same layer. So we can go back to our other layer where we drew the first few trees. And we're doing that because this will overlap trees number 4 and 6, and we don't want to affect what we already drew. I'm going to go with a nice big leaf shape again. Although it's good to have variety in the shapes, it's also important to repeat some shapes as well, so things feel cohesive. Now this smaller tree will be behind this one, so we can just erase that top edge where they overlap. And again, this is why we're working on different layers. Now let's make this last tree curve to the right. And remember, we want some shapes to repeat, so let's go back to the round pom-pom shapes for this tree. Start with basic circles to figure out the placement, then add those curves to bring a bit more detail to the shapes. We can now pinch those two layers together to merge them, then create a new layer for the mushroom houses. You can start with a really light, very rough sketch to map out where you want the houses to go. Then draw your mushrooms, starting with the stalk at the base. Add an oval shape above that for the bottom of the cap. Then finish the cap off with a dome shape. I'm also going to give this a wavy edge. Since this mushroom is also a house, we're going to need a door. And you can add whatever details you'd like. Now this mushroom will be much taller, so start with a long curved stalk. And we'll make the cap for this one really tall and curved as well. Add an oval to the base of the cap. And you can use the eraser tool to remove the part of the stalk that will be hidden by the cap. Now we don't want to see this line where the mushroom and the hill intersect. So let's go back to that other sketch layer and erase that section of the hill that will be hidden behind the mushroom. Switch back to the mushroom layer when you're done, and don't forget to switch back to the pencil. Now you can draw the details on this house. So add a door, a tiny little window, and I'll add an attic window too since the roof is so tall. Now your houses don't need to be mushroom shapes. You can make them look completely different. You can draw more houses, have fun with it, and get as creative as you'd like. Okay, let's add a little garden to each house. Now playing with scale is a great way to add whimsy to a scene. So instead of drawing a garden of tiny flowers, let's draw giant flower buds. We can keep things simpler on this side and just add a few leaves. Then to make this even more playful, we can add patterns to the hills. First, let's pinch those two sketch layers together to merge them. Then add a new layer where we'll draw the patterns. You can really have fun with this and draw whatever patterns you'd like inside these hill shapes. Some can be curves, vertical lines, and if you decide to repeat some of the patterns, play with the scale so it still feels interesting. We can try a V-shaped pattern on this hill, and maybe a kind of tree branch pattern here. I'm not sure how I feel about this one. I might change it later. All right, let's create another sketch layer and drag it below the main sketch. We're going to draw a couple clouds in the background. Now these are very simple shapes, just a row of curves with a line below. And you can erase the parts of the line that will be hidden by the trees. Go ahead and do the same for this one as well. Now let's merge all of those sketch layers. Then reduce the opacity. Create a new layer and drag it below the sketch. Now we can move on to color. Open up the Procreate library, go to the charcoals set, and we're going to use Florentine. If you'd like a preview of how this brush behaves, you can watch my brush review video, which I'll link in the corner and in the description below. Let's open up the palette, and the first color we're going to use is cyan. We're going to start with the first hill on the left. So follow that shape with the brush at a medium size, then increase the brush size to fill with color manually. If you watched that Florentine brush review video, you'll know that this brush is semi-transparent. So you're going to see some brush strokes overlapping, and you can add a few more layers of color to smooth that out, but I'm not going to smooth it out too much because those visible brush strokes do add some nice texture. Now let's switch the color to midnight, and let's add some color to the hill on the far right. Same process here, just build up the color till it's as smooth as you want it. Now this hill is behind this one, so create a new layer and drag it below. Then change the color to powder. Again, we're going to take our time and do a manual fill. For the next hill, create a new layer, drag it below the powder blue hill, then change the color to cornflower. and follow the same process. For that last tiny hill, create a new layer and drag it below all the other hill layers. Then change the color to cyan. You'll need to make the brush size a little smaller for this one. When I turn the sketch off, you can see that the color is pretty flat right now. So let's add a little shading to some of those hills. Let's go back to the layer with the foreground hills, which are these two. And let's see, we used cyan for that first hill. So let's try electric blue for the shading. Just add this darker color in the corner and along the bottom edge. Then switch to the smudge tool, also set to Florentine, and start to blend that in. If it looks like nothing's happening, you might need to increase the opacity on the smudge tool. Then it should blend a little more easily. Now let's move on to the second hill and add a darker color to the edge to create some separation. So find that layer and choose a color. Actually, I think I'll use the electric blue here as well. Add that darker color along the left edge where the first hill overlaps, and a little along the bottom as well. Then switch to the smudge tool to soften the transition. Okay, let's move on to the tiny hill. Find that layer, and let's try the cornflower blue. This time we're going to turn on Alpha Lock on that layer because we're going to add this color along the top edge, and we don't want the color to spill outside of that shape. Then switch to the smudge tool to blend. And I'm going to temporarily turn my sketch off to get a better view. Now that I have the sketch turned off, I can see that this light blue hill is really transparent, and I can clearly see the edges of the darker hill below. So I'm going to go back to that layer with the hill on the left, then switch to the eraser tool and erase that entire section that I don't want to show through. Here I've got the eraser tool set to the same Florentine brush, but you can use whatever eraser brush you prefer. All right, now I think we can add a little more color to this light blue hill as well. So find that layer and switch the color to baby blue. Add a little of that color to the lower right side and switch to the smudge tool to blend. I've been finding that circular motions seem to work best for blending these. Now turn the sketch back on, select all those hill layers and group them. Then create a new layer and switch the color to midnight. We're going to ink all of the tree trunks on this new layer, and we'll ink the branches as well. All right, once you've inked all the tree trunks, take that layer and drag it below the hills group so that all the ends of those lines are hidden behind the hills. Now let's ink all the fun tree shapes. We're going to create a new layer and drag it below the tree trunk layer. And let's switch the color to baby blue. We're going to ink this big leaf shape first. So start with an outline with the brush at a relatively small size. Then increase the brush size to manually fill that shape. Remember, this brush is not opaque, so the first couple passes will be uneven and they won't look that great, but by the second layer of color, it'll begin to smooth out. Now, how many layers you add will depend on how smooth you want it to look. Like I mentioned earlier, I like the texture it creates when you can see some of the brush strokes, so I'm not going to smooth it out too much. With the sketch off, you can really see the original outline, and I don't want that to be quite so prominent, so I'm going to add a couple more light layers of color to hide that outline so it's not so obvious. We could still use a little color variation here, so let's switch to the cornflower, and I'm going to turn on Alpha Lock on that layer. And using a really light touch, we can add a few strokes of this darker color here and there. All right, let's use that same color combo for this tree as well. So switch back to the baby blue, start with an outline just like we did before, Then increase the brush size to fill. And remember, it's easier to clean up the streaky areas if you turn your sketch off. Now turn the sketch back on, switch the color back to cornflower, and use that darker blue to add those curves on the canopy. And you can add a few lighter strokes here and there. Now let's ink these round little pom-pom trees. On this side, they're positioned behind this tree, so we need to create a new layer and drag it below tree canopy 1. And for the color, let's actually stick with the cornflower. Same process here, outline the shape, then increase the brush size to fill manually. Since this smaller shape is tucked behind the larger one, I'm going to outline most of it, but along this edge, I'm going to stop just shy of touching the other shape. So I'm leaving a little white space between the two shapes. We'll come back to fill that area later, but for now, we can just fill this smaller shape with color. And go ahead and do the same for the tree on the far right as well. If you need to, go ahead and add a couple more layers to smooth out that color a bit more. Now let's fill that gap. Switch the color to the electric blue, then fill that gap separating the two shapes, and you can extend the darker blue so it's a little wider. Then use the smudge tool to soften that color transition. Now we've got some separation between those two shapes because of that shadow. If you'd like, you can use that same color to add a few additional details to those pom-pom trees. All right, let's tackle this tree next, and it will be in front of this tree from the first canopy layer. So create a new layer and drag it above tree canopy 1. And as for the color, let's go with cyan. As usual, we're going to first outline, then fill the shape, and add a couple more layers to smooth out the color. These two blues are a little close in tone, so let's add a darker color along this edge to create some separation. Turn on Alpha Lock on that layer, and we're going to change the color to Midnight. Using a really light touch, add a few strokes of that color along the right edge. We're using a light touch because this brush is pressure sensitive, so if you press down really hard, the color will get darker, but we don't want this to be too dark. Let's paint this tree next. Create a new layer right above the third canopy layer. And for the color, let's use cornflower again. You know how this process goes. First, outline the shapes. And I'm going to outline all 3 leaves while I have the brush at this size. Then you can increase the brush size to fill all 3. Now let's turn on Alpha Lock on that layer. And this time we're going to add a lighter color. So let's use the baby blue. Not only will this color add a little texture and visual interest, it's also going to help separate this leaf from the tree behind it. And remember, we're using feather-light strokes so the color remains semi-transparent. We just have one more tree and it's in the background behind these two. So create a new layer and drag it below all of the other canopy layers. And this time we're going to try the electric blue. Outline the shape, then fill. Now this blue is very bright, but we can tone it down a bit with another color. So let's switch to the baby blue, go to that layer and turn on Alpha Lock. Then add a few strokes of that lighter color to help break up the vibrancy of that blue. As usual, we're just using a really light touch here. We don't want the color shift to be too dramatic. Because the brush is fairly transparent, we can see right through this tree trunk in the foreground. So to fix that, we can go back to the tree trunks layer Switch the color back to midnight and add a second layer of that color to make it more opaque. Okay, I'm going to turn off Alpha Lock on that last canopy layer we worked on, then select all the canopy layers to group them. Let's turn the sketch back on, and next we're going to paint the little mushroom houses. Create a new layer and move it so it's above the hills group. Then choose Whimsical from the palette. We're going to use that color to paint the mushroom stalks. Now create a new layer above the mushroom stalks, then choose the orange. We'll use this color for the cap on the short mushroom house. With the brush at a small size, first outline the shape, then increase the brush size to fill. Let's ink this other mushroom cap on the same layer as well. For this one, let's try the bubblegum pink. And we're going to do the same here as well. Outline with a fairly small brush size so you have enough control. Then increase the size and fill manually. Now we need to add color to the underside of these caps. So create a new layer and drag it below the layer with the mushroom stalks. Switch the color to light lavender. Then fill those sections on both mushrooms. Now we need to add a little shadow to those sections so the color isn't so flat. We already have the light lavender selected. Now tap on the color disc and drag the color finder to the right until you find a darker purple that you like. Then you're going to add that darker color along the edge of that section. Then use the smudge tool to soften the transition and blend those two colors. For the shadow on this one, I'm going to start with the bubblegum pink, then use the color disc to create a slightly darker version of that color. Then add that darker color to the inner edge, just like we did before, and use the smudge tool to blend. Let's turn the sketch back on. Then we're going to go back to the layer with the mushroom stalks. Turn on Alpha Lock on that layer, then change the color to tangerine. We're going to use that color to add a little shading along the top edge and right side of both mushroom stalks. You're going to use very little pressure here because we want the color to be light and transparent. Now add a new layer above the mushroom stalks and we're going to paint the doors. We're still using the tangerine color, but this time press down more firmly and you'll notice that the color looks darker and more opaque. Go ahead and paint this little window too. Now go to that layer with the windows and doors, turn on Alpha Lock, then switch to the deep orange. You're going to add a line of shadow along the right side of each of those shapes. We can use that same color to add the details on the door as well. Remember to turn Alpha Lock off when you're done with those layers. Tap on the layer with the mushroom caps, then create a new layer right above it, and we're going to paint the little attic window. Choose the light lavender, then outline and fill the shape. Turn on Alpha Lock on that layer, and let's go back to the same purple we used for the shadow here. So tap on that color and hold to select it. Then add a little line of shadow to the right side, just like we did with the doors and the other window. I'm also going to use white to add a little highlight on the left side of that window. Let's go back to the mushroom caps layer, turn Alpha Lock on, then change the color to pink. Now we're going to use the side of the pencil tip to add some shading along the right side of the mushroom cap. Then you can use the smudge tool to blend that transition. For this mushroom, let's first use the tangerine to add a highlight to the left side of the cap. Again, I'm using the side of the pencil tip to get nice broad strokes. Then switch the color to deep orange to add the shadow on the right side. Now let's add a few details to those mushroom caps. So create a new layer, switch to the creamsicle, And with the brush set to a fairly small size, draw tiny crescent shapes all over the cap. Let's choose a different color for this one. So switch to the light lavender and do the same here as well. Okay, the houses are done, so we can select all of the mushroom layers and group them. Then create a new layer and turn the sketch back on. Next, we're going to paint the plants around each little house, and we're going to start with the electric blue. We're going to put down a base layer of this color for all the leaves. So go through and outline and fill all the leaf shapes. Now go to that layer, turn on Alpha Lock, and switch the color to Midnight. Now we're going to add a line of that dark blue along the edge of each leaf. This is just a quick stylized way to add value contrast. Okay, turn Alpha Lock off and turn the sketch back on. And while we still have that color set to Midnight, we can paint the flower stems as well. I'm using a couple strokes for each line to make that color darker and more opaque. When those stems are done, add a new layer right above and change the color to pink. Go ahead and outline and fill all those flower buds. Now switch to the bubblegum pink, and we'll use that to add a little highlight to each of those buds. Let's add a few darker details as well. Go back to the pink, tap on the color disc, and let's create a darker version of that color. Then go to the layer with the flower buds and turn on Alpha Lock. Now we can add a few quick lines to the base of each bud with that darker pink. I'm just going to add a couple quick shadow lines here too. Okay, let me turn the sketch back on. And the next thing we need to do is add all the fun patterns to the hills. Okay, let's see. First, create a new layer, then move it so it's right above the hills group. Then choose the baby blue. We'll start with the V pattern on this hill. And keep in mind that we don't want perfect V shapes. Keep the strokes nice and loose and keep the placement really random. Then for this hill, let's use Midnight for these stripes. Make sure to use very light pressure as you draw these, because if you press down too hard, the stroke size will get too wide and the color will get a little too dark. So just keep that in mind. I'm not using any masks, so I've drawn past the edge of the shape. So I'm going to turn off the sketch, switch to the eraser tool, then erase right up to the edge of that hill. By the way, I've got the eraser tool set to the Stanley brush from the Basics set because it will give me a quick, clean erase with a hard edge. If you want to avoid erasing, you could add a clipping mask layer for each hill, but to keep things simple, I'm just drawing these patterns on the same layer, so that means I have to do a little cleanup. All right, let's tackle these stripes next. So switch the color to baby blue. And the brush size will need to be quite small for this. And just follow those vertical lines. I'm going to overshoot the shape again, but remember, we're still on the same layer as the other patterns, so make sure you don't overlap the curved stripes. Then you can turn the sketch off and use the eraser tool to erase up to the edge. Again, be careful not to erase the dark blue stripes we drew earlier. And don't forget to erase this edge as well. This hill also has vertical lines, so let's switch the color to cornflower and paint those stripes as well. Again, I find it easier to overshoot the shape because I can get a straighter line if I use my entire arm. I think it's harder to get a nice smooth flow if you're trying to be super precise about where the lines end. We can just go in after the fact with the eraser tool to clean that up. Now on this last hill, we've got this kind of branch pattern. So let's use the cyan. And since the lines might intersect these stripes, let's actually do this on a new layer. Hey, this is Gia from the future during editing. Once I painted that pattern, I realized that I didn't like it at all. So I'm skipping this section forward so we can move on to the alternate version. Okay, bye. Instead of that busy pattern, I think something simple would work better here. And I'm actually glad I did that on a separate layer because I can just clear that layer and try again. I'm just going to draw horizontal stripes instead. And because I'm on a different layer, drawing past the edge of this hill won't affect the pattern next to it. And I can just erase without destroying what I did on the other layer. Now I can group those two pattern layers, or you can pinch them together to merge them if you prefer. And our final touch will be to paint the clouds and sky in the background. Go down to the bottom of the layer stack, tap on the template, and create a new layer right above it. Switch the color to powder, and we're going to use a different brush to paint the sky. Open the brush library, and we're still in the charcoal set, but we're going to switch the brush to Firetail, which will give us a nice broad stroke. Set the brush size to 100%, then use really light strokes back and forth to fill the sky. This brush is even more transparent than Florentine, so you'll see the color shift where the strokes overlap, but you can go through and add a couple more light strokes to even out the color. Or you can use the smudge tool, also set to Firetail, to blend those uneven areas. Now for the clouds. Create a new layer right above the sky layer. Change the color to white. Oh, and don't forget to switch back to the Florentine brush. Outline the cloud shape. Then increase the brush size to fill manually. Do the same for that second cloud as well. Then switch the smudge tool back to Florentine. Then you're going to blend away that hard edge at the bottom of the cloud so it seamlessly transitions into the sky. But we're going to keep the crisp curves at the top of the cloud. All right, that's it. There's our whimsical landscape drawing. I really hope you had fun with this process. And if you'd like to try more tutorials, there's a link to the playlist in the description. If you enjoyed this video, remember to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching.